Right. So welcome all to our June meeting. Our agenda for this meeting today is learning flows with Mark. And we'll look at the latest offerings from summer 21 release and add it to our skills as awesome admins. Mark was my coach. I had the privilege to learn some coding at Rad Women's Intro to Coding class. He's a Salesforce Technical Architect, MVP, platform champion, and he's here to present flows to us. So please feel free to ask fantastic questions and enrich your knowledge and help Ohana to move to the next level with this automation tool. And after this, after his presentation, you will watch TDX21 I hope you watched TDX21 because you'll be quizzed on it. And you have an opportunity to win a certification voucher by participating in this quiz. 20 seconds for each answer, and we have 10 questions. So get ready, you all, right? So moving on to the next screen, I'm Shiva Tukral. I'm the group leader of San Ramon Salesforce admin group. And I have 7 certifications, 8 super badges, very proud of them. I hope to keep growing them and learning with you all. Next up, we have grown our membership to a phenomenal level, and we had like 80 RSVPs for this meeting, and we hope to keep growing. So we have presence in LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and I will post all those links in chat right after my introduction. So please give us any updates, any job breaks, any new certifications, super badges. We would love to know and celebrate with you any new and exciting news at your end. And then this was a Juneteenth month, and it was a holiday at many places. So, and also Happy Father's Month. So I wish all the fathers, all the inspiring fathers, a very happy Father's Month. And a little tip, you can save the chat. I'll be posting a lot of links. You can save the chat at the bottom of the chat screen. There are 3 dots at the bottom. So you can save that whole chat screen, and you don't have to really copy the links, but just save the chat and you can later go through those links. And please type the questions in your chat box, and you can ask the questions while the presentation is going on. Mark welcomes interactivity, and he would welcome questions while he's presenting. And smile and enjoy the session. And these are some flow resources I gathered to help you in your knowledge of flows. And some is like this. These are all very well-known publishers of flows, so hope you have the option to go through those resources as well. And this month's findings were, thanks Mark for sharing this, Flow Orchestrator. I'll put that link as well. Please go through this lovely article at your time. And then there was another lovely article on dynamic interactions, which came out after TDX21, and it's how the different components interact with each other, and through drag and drop in App Builder. So I'll put these links in the chat, and you all can benefit from that. So I have the privilege to welcome Mark Adcock. He's the Salesforce MVP, platform champion, 14 times certified, and he's a Salesforce technical architect. And he's currently working for United Healthcare. Mark, is it right? So one fun fact about him, he's traveled pre-COVID 3 times across US and even Canada, and has loved all his traveling experience.
That 3 times was actually over a 45-day window.
Oh yeah, exactly.
It was over a short window. That was part of what made it so intense.
That makes it even more awesome, right? So I'll hand it over to you, Mark. So everybody you can enjoy this lovely presentation ahead.
Yeah, so that was like, let's see. I am currently not able to share yet, Shiva.
All right, sorry, I'll have to make you the co-host.
Sure, no problem.
Yep. Are you able to share now?
Yep, I've got it now. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this, I don't do a whole lot of stuff in decks on my flow presentations. I usually spend a lot more time in hands-on, but this time around, I figured I'd go ahead and throw some stuff into a quick deck to kind of share and give some basic highlights. So as Shiva said, I am a technical architect. I currently work at United Health Group. I actually deal with a Salesforce org that just does our COVID care management for employees. And I also co-lead the Charlottesville, Virginia community group. I have 14 certifications, and I keep trying to find time to settle down and take care of my last one for the systems architect, amongst a couple of others. I am an MVP. I used to be a platform champion. Platform champion is now a gone thing. They've sunset that program, so I'm not, but a lot of us are still active in the community and still doing things. So, and then I'm also a Rad Women Code coach, as you know, Shiva mentioned, where we originally met, along with a few of the other people who are joining in. And this is my third cohort of teaching with the Rad Women Code, and it's a program I really enjoy working with and getting involved. I really enjoy catching up with people and getting in touch with people, so I will include some contact information here. Connect with me on Twitter. I'll share out my Trailblazer community ID here in the chat, which links to my LinkedIn and other stuff, as well as the Trailblazer community. And absolutely love getting in touch with people and hearing what's going on with stuff. I have a website. I don't post often, so you know, it's there. But let's talk about flows. So first off, what is flow? So sometimes called lightning flows. These are interactive screen components or backend automations, and they're built using a visual programming language or interface called Flow Builder. Okay, that's your resources you're sharing, Shiva. Okay. And so they can be interactive screen components, or they can be backend automations. They can be like your workflow rules, your process builder, et cetera. But they're much more advanced than either workflow rules or process builder can get into. And they fall into a couple of main categories. So the main categories for flows are user interactive, and these are flows which have a user interface. They are screen flows right now. There's no other interactive kind than the screen flow. And then you have these back-end flows. These all have some particular scenario that triggers them to run, and then they carry out some kind of back-end automation. So your first one, the screen flow, these are interactive, and you can guide users through processes, and they're really cool for that. They also can be used to leverage other flows, and these can be other screen flows that launches a subflow. So for example, you know, you don't have to build it all into one big flow. You can make things more modular and reusable. And I'll tell you, like we have a thing that I use at work, and we use a flow to guide people through an interview process when someone is potentially exposed to COVID and the tracer has it. And we split it out into different screen flows so that it's easier to work with. And if they have this scenario, this screen flow runs as a subflow. If they have this scenario, this screen runs as a subflow. If they don't have that scenario, it never runs. And it makes it much more modular and easier to manage. But the cool thing about these is that these also can have lightning components put in them to make a custom interface. So your screen flow is not just like a form, but you can actually basically think of these as a custom component builder. And you can actually put stuff together that basically makes them custom components. And it's really cool what you can do with these without having to get into coding, or if you do code, the things you can do to extend these to work with it. Past that, you're getting into your back-end flows. So you've got your scheduled triggered flows. These run on a specific set intervals, and they process records. And this is a big improvement because at one point in time, the only back-end automation you had for scheduling was Apex. And you had to schedule Apex, which also had to be batch Apex, which had to have all this other stuff to go along with it. And that put it out of reach for a lot of people. Whereas these scheduled triggered flows bring it down to where pretty much anyone can build something that can work on things. And one of the scenarios I have for a scheduled triggered flow is to send an email to someone who hasn't updated an account regularly. These accounts are out of date. Let's send you an email to say, hey, go back and get in touch with these people. This is a high priority account. Auto launch flows. These don't have a trigger that happens. You have to have something else trigger them. So if you worked with flows from Process Builder before, this was an auto launched flow. Or these could also be called by a Screenflow can call an auto launch flow to do some backend logic. A Process Builder can call these. Another automated one can call an auto launched flow. And you can also call these from Apex code. Record triggered flows are kind of the most common that's coming up right now. They're the one that gets the most attention at the moment because these are ways to build triggers with declarative tools. And you can have them do things like before update and after update and before insert, after insert. So they have multiple run contexts. You can have these. And so you can do things like change a record on the fly before you save it. And anyone who's worked with like Process Builder and workflow rules, you'll see that it happens that it saves the record, then it updates. Well, record triggered lets you do that before it updates. So if you just need to calculate a value for a field, then it can't be a formula because you need to use it or change it later. You can use a record triggered flow for that. And we'll play around with these a little bit later. And then you've got your platform event triggered. And these are usually an automation method because platform events can be created from within Salesforce by Apex. They could create by a package, a managed package could create that and give you some control, but they can also be created by outside of Salesforce. So you can have another system that sends in through the integration a platform event, and you can have a flow that responds and does something with that. So, it could be a platform event comes in and it's got details on a case from your HR system. Okay, well, now it creates the case, and you can make a flow that goes and reads through this platform event and goes, okay, I've got this field and this value, this field and this value, this field and this value, and creates a case. And it's a really powerful tool for making a lot of integration automations without having to have someone write code. So before we get into demoing things, let's talk about what's new in Summer 21. So one of the first things on Summer 21 was these multi-column screen flows. And so before this, you could have a flow and it was one column. So if you had a bunch of checkboxes with short fields, well, guess what? They were all one column. You could have a form that went and scrolled way, 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 way down the screen. But you also couldn't show things in alignment with one another. So you ended up with a lot of white space. You ended up with a lot of things that couldn't necessarily be efficiently use your screen. And you might have a lot of scrolling and you couldn't leverage it. So this is now finally generally available, and you can now have multiple columns and you can resize them and do pretty cool things with them. So you can play around with that on a screen flow. And then some of these changes for this is changed in record triggered update flows. This is really kind of a huge one because before this, like you had Process Builder did this and workflow rules did this, but flows did not. And so now you can make a decision on it. Well, do we go down this path? Well, only if this field was changed. So you can make your flows more efficient. This is a big thing for making flows more efficient because you only care if this record changed or this field changed. You don't care if it has that value. You need it to only go when someone changes that value. And say you're talking about status. A circumstance that I had recently was, we had something that was going on, and the criteria that someone put in there originally was it was this value or this value. And every time the record changed, someone edited something else in the case, it made that particular rule fire again. And it would potentially send off an email to that person again every time someone went and edited the case and edited something other than the status field. So now if we make it so that only when that status field changes the first time, they only get that email once. expansion of some things. So there's this record.global. You have these variable elements that you can use in Flow, and they've added this new one called record.global. And this gives you things like, has the record changed? Is the field changed? Is it new? And the prior value. And this is really useful because you can do comparisons and go, okay, so if someone went from a low priority to a high priority, we want to do this. We want to put a task in for the account exec to reach out to them. We want to put in a case for support to go do this, or we're going to assign a customer success manager because they've now hit a tier automatically that they're now going to get us into our customer success program. This is now possible to do with flows, and it was not possible before summer 21 without a lot of clunky workarounds. There's a bunch of pick list improvements, and so setting default values, that has been a pain point for many years. Now you don't need to set up your own new choice element. You can add one. You don't need a duplicate. You can set them as required, and it'll add a none to that field so that you can have a not specified, but someone can still be required to put an answer in. You can switch your format between pick list, checkbox groups, radio buttons, etc., without having to start over. That was a kind of a big change for a lot of things because you start off with one component, and then the second you finish with it, you have to go back to the other. They've made some other improvements to the canvas. So the canvas that you build on, so it's now possible to see more items displayed on the canvas in real time. So it previews them. And we'll take a look at that. But what used to happen before is you'd see the field, but you wouldn't see what was entered in the field or how it would display properly. You'd just see a little empty box that says, this is where such and such would go. And you had to run or debug the flow in order to see that real. Now they're showing more on the canvas. There's also, if you change the visibility of icons, this now has something that shows you that, makes it easier to tell stuff that's been selectively hidden or revealed. And that's kind of a key thing because, as we build these forms, a lot of cases you don't want to show everything all at once. So you want to show a certain question only if they answer yes to another question. And show only certain things if they show a certain way. But being able to tell which elements were hidden or not at a given time was not possible before without actually opening the element. So you might just have to memorize all the things. There's some beta features that are kind of cool. They're new stuff, so I didn't deal into them because they are beta features. But the fields from objects, you can actually add a field directly to a layout. So before this, if you wanted to add a field to it, you may have had to add a type of field and a this and a that. And now you can potentially, with this beta feature, you can just add the field. So you say, oh, I've got this field. I want to add this name. I don't need to go back and get a text field and then call it name and do this and do this and do this to update it. I can now just drag the field that says name on there, and it's set up correctly. This is a beta feature. It is changing a little bit, so it has some quirks to it, but it's an improvement because it makes it easier to build. So instead of having to configure a component to display like it's a name field, you drag the name field over, you drag the address field over, you drag some of these other fields over, and you put them there. So it becomes a little bit more like editing a page layout than having to make all these custom elements line up and specify default values. You have scheduled paths on auto layout. This is before now, when you had a scheduled path, you could not use the auto layout option. The second you want to do a scheduled path, you had to go back to the manual layout. This now, there's an option on the automatic layout to allow scheduled paths, which is basically, think of it like in 3 days I wanted to do this, and in 4 days I wanted to do this, and in 5 days I wanted to do this. So going back to the work world that I have, we have people who may have been exposed to COVID because of our contact tracing. And if they say they were there, but they don't have any symptoms, we actually put them on this journey that sends them an email every day for a specified time period to report whether or not they're experiencing symptoms. So we can keep track of what's going on with them. And if they report symptoms, we put them in a queue so we can make sure the employee gets the help they need. If they continue to not have symptoms during that time, it takes them out of the process. But this is now something that could not be done on the auto layout. It is now possible to do this on auto layout. And again, like biggest complaint on the auto layout was it was huge on the screen, and you couldn't get a lot of elements on it. You couldn't see it. So now it's a larger canvas. It is a beta, but it's a nice feature. There was a lot of debugging enhancements to make it easier to work with debugging. There's a great article from Jennifer Lee that covers a lot of these things in much better depth. So I will share this out because she has some things, and she is former MVP, and now she is actually one of the admin evangelists. So you can expect some really cool things from Flow and Flow documentation and examples coming in the future from the admin evangelist team. But in the meantime, I wanted to kind of switch gears to demoing and get live into Flow Builder. So does anyone have any kind of questions or things they want to talk about, some other features that I may have not been able to discuss here, or some questions before we actually get into the meat of the demo and what's going on and how to use Flow? I see Janae with a hand raised.
Mark, this is great content, by the way. I had 2 questions for you. Is your demo going to include scheduled paths? And
I can actually include scheduled stuff. I do have a scenario that shows a scheduled flow and how to work with it. Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And another is there if someone's getting, so like I've done Flow in the past, but it's been so long, and I found that there's only limited or not as much trailhead content on Flow. Is there a great place that you'd recommend for someone who's either getting back interested or someone who's learning it from scratch?
So there's a lot of it. So a lot of stuff on Flow, it's changed so much over the past year, I think, is one of the things that's happened. Flow Builder has gotten a lot of improvements. So there's stuff on Trailhead, but a lot of it's new, and a lot of it's kind of hidden in certain areas. Jennifer Lee's blog is one of the best because she actually walks through a lot of real world use case examples for Flow and solving a specific problem. And so, you know, she's had some stuff, and her past dog Addison takes on the role as Addison Dogster, who is the admin for a company, and solves all kinds of problems with Flow Builder and processes and other stuff like that. And then there's also a reference, I think Shiba, I think you had in your links, of Automation Hour. And this is a weekly kind of webinar series that has real world Flow use case examples in it, as people talk about how they work through something, how they solve a problem. And, you know, because it's a programming interface. So, you know, for me, when I'm trying to learn something, all the examples that are kind of out there, some of the abstract stuff that's on Trailhead is fine, but give me a real scenario that I'm trying to solve, or some business process that I can kind of relate to and understand. I feel better, I learn it better. I understand how it works better, right? And I think that's why for me, the Jennifer Lee's blog, the Automation Hour, and Rakesh Gupta, who has his Automation Champion blog, these are all really useful examples for me when I was trying to learn Flow, because they were real scenarios and they were real problems. And, you know, some cases I could actually go to them and go, okay, so this is about leads rather than cases, but it's doing the same thing that I'm trying to do. So maybe I can learn to apply it, or this is about this and it's this, but I can learn to apply it. And that was really helpful because these are useful business scenarios, as opposed to just a random oh, well, I'm just going to do this. So I'm going to send an email every time a dog gets a lollipop. You know, and some of these examples out there are very abstract, and you're like, okay, but you should be giving the dog the lollipop. That's bad for them. Right? You get stuck on the kind of scenario that doesn't make sense. And, you know, so this is the stuff. Another one here is, there is content on Pluralsight now, which I did not know that there was Flow content on Pluralsight. I actually like Pluralsight a lot. I use it. I have been a Pluralsight subscriber for years, and they have a lot of great video content out there about all kinds of things. So apparently they've added some Flow content there now, with people doing some Flow instruction. Anyone else have some questions or some things to discuss here?
Just a quick question, Mark.
Oh, Cherry's Tidbits YouTube series as well. Okay. Yep. Your question there?
Yes, sorry, I was gonna ask you that. So that admin exam has changed, and looks like that they have included flow part of the exam. So I was wondering if you know anything about this new.
I think they have started including some basic stuff around flows on the admin exam. I don't think it's an extensive portion of the exam, but they do have some stuff in there. And one of the reasons why is because workflow rules and process builders are meant to go away. They're moving everything into flow for that back-end automation. So you're either going to be in no code / low code like flow, or you're going to be in code with Apex. Because there's a lot of stuff it's problematic. Process builder doesn't scale well. It can't do the before update versus that. Same with workflow rules. They don't scale well. They have really essentially hard limitations on what these can do. And as things build out, Salesforce is really looking to enable people more. And so flow is the direction they're going for automation that's in the low code world. And it's coming up. I don't know what they've added specifically to the admin exam, but I know there's a little bit around kind of flows, what you can do with things. And I think the things you'd look at would be typically not so much like how to do something in flow, but whether or not flow is the way to do a particular task, and you'll have questions that would be, my guess, just from my own experience, is how do we do blah, 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 blah? And you could be like, well, you could use a flow. And it'll be like, oh, I could have workflow rules of this. And, they'll come back and say, well, technically you can't do this with a workflow rule because of blah, 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 and blah, 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 but you can do this with a flow. And so that's the kind of scenario you're probably going to run into. It's not going to be much about building flows. It's going to be about when you would use a flow versus something else.
Thank you.
If you get into Platform App Builder, they're getting more into what you can do with flows on that one as time goes on. I know it doesn't have a whole lot right now, I don't think, but it probably will be extending in Platform App Builder to have that. Anyone else with stuff? Great question so far. All right, so with that, I am going to dive right into our demo stuff here. So first off, I'm going to play around with a Screenflow here. Now, I like business scenarios. I have said, I need to understand what I'm doing. So when we get into flows, we have two different things. We have our free form. You can do whatever you want with this. You can drag things around on the page. You can have elements that are disconnected and reconnect them and all sorts of other stuff. Then you have this auto layout, which makes the lines nice, neat, and straight and does everything else, but it also has its own limits. The auto layout is usually easiest if you have not worked with flow much before. And you can still toggle back and forth. But when we get into Flow Builder, there's a couple things here. And so when we're not in our auto layout, we have this thing called the Elements Toolbox over here on our left-hand side. And these are the things that you can do with a flow. So flows are broken down into essentially 3 different categories of things. You have interaction stuff that you can do, you have logic stuff that you can do, and you have data stuff that you can do. Now, some of you who may come from a programming world may have heard of this thing called the model view controller way of doing software development. Well, Flow was originally kind of oriented around that. And so here we have our controller, went in reverse here. My brain is on Saturday mode right now, my apologies. So here we have our model stuff. These are things that talk to our data model. So we can create records, we can update, we can get records, we can delete records. This, from someone who's done any programming, get records, also known as a SQL query. So when we drag a get records element onto the page, we are doing a SQL query. We are telling it what data we want. So I'm going to do something here for this, my scenario that I have is I want to make a screen flow that allows someone to really rapidly update some key information on a record. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show a place. And what I want to do with this record is I want a quick way to update contact information for a particular contact. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at Mr. Andy Young for a moment. And say we have a process now where we've changed some things and we want people to specify whether we can email them and whether we can call them about stuff. And we want to verify that contact information for this person. Well, I can make it so that I can bring stuff in and work with stuff, and I can guide a person through that, right? I can tell them that they have to do this and they have to do that and they have to do this. Has anyone ever worked with sales reps before? Or customer support or anyone else? If you don't make it easy for people to do stuff, they don't do it. It happens. They miss things, right? No matter the intentions, like, oh yeah, but I got caught up and I was talking about this and we missed asking about this question, or we missed that thing. It happens. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just one of those things. So I want to give them an easy way to update these fields. So I'm going to use the Screenflow to do this. And what's going to happen is I'm going to connect to it with a button that will launch a particular flow and make it easy for them to do this. So since this is a screen flow, I started off here, and I need to do some things with this. So it's going to sit on a page, and I'm going to switch to auto layout because this is easier to view and follow. Notice my elements disappear from over here on the left when I'm in auto layout. That's because they come here, and I can quickly select from the same things. So I've got a screen flow here, and I'm going to start putting some stuff in here. So what are the key information that I want to update on this person? I want to, well, let's start off with, what do I want to do? I want to display that person. I want to guide them through a flow. So I want them to understand what's going on and what they're doing with this. So I'm going to start off with some display text. I am going to give them something here where I can say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is here. One of the eccentricities about Flow Builder, sometimes you get a label, sometimes you don't. If I have a label, it'll do the usual thing of putting it in snake case and for the API name. If I don't have a label, it's going to yell at me. And I have to put it in and put something there, and it has to be different than the other elements. Now, reason why is because, again, this is a programming interface, and this stuff is getting stored somewhere in the back end of telling it this, I need to pull this and do this and do this. So when I'm giving it this, I've got that. So I now want this to display and go, okay, well, I can give it some text. What if I want to make it more personal? I want to make it feel more for them. Hello. So I can use this to insert various resources that I have. And note, I've got stuff from the API that could come in here, and ooh, that's a lot of different things that are oddball here. I don't really want to use API, do I? Okay. I could use the flow, which has all sorts of elements up under it about the flow. And I could do all sorts of other things. The one I want here is user in this case. And I'm going to do, notice I can start typing and it's going to suggest and narrow my list down. So if I know what I'm looking for. All right, so now I've got this to merge. And so if I go to run this flow, I'm going to get, and so this is, I'm just going to call it with today's date because I've got a bunch of these in here. All right. And I can now debug it or run it. When I go to debug, the nice thing about this is it's going to give me some information here. So if I have some input variables, some things that I need to start the flow, I can put them down here. I haven't specified anything, so it won't let me. But we'll do that in just a second. And it's going to tell me how the interview started. Well, Mark Adcock started the flow. And I've got a transaction committed, any records that the flow was ready to create, update, or delete, or committed to the database. Well, it didn't do anything. But I can see here now, hello, Mark. This flow will guide you through the process of updating key demographic and contact consent information. But I want this to do a little bit more. So which contact record am I on? I want to put that in. Here's the thing. Right now, notice amongst my merge stuff, I didn't have anything about a contact. So what I'm going to have to do here is I'm going to set up a resource. And it's going to be a variable. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to hopefully call it record ID, because this is the record that it's going to be on. And it's going to be text. And I'm going to allow this for input. So this will tell me which particular contact record I'm on in order for me to get that information. Now, why did I call it record ID like this? Because there's special processing logic in the back end for Salesforce that if I make a field called record ID, or if I'm giving it a collection of record IDs that is multiple records, it will automatically fill this. So if it's from my list view and I have record IDs there, it'll automatically fill it. If I put it in record ID, it'll put it there. If I don't have that there, I'll have to create my own special variable and own process to populate it. It's not that hard, but it's a little bit of extra work that I can avoid. The other thing that I have now, though, is all I've got is the record ID. It just passes the record ID to me. It doesn't give me the whole record. So if I were in programming world and I needed to get all the details of a record, what would I do? Well, I do a SOQL query, or in this case, I'm going to do what's called a get records element. So I need to get contact info. And I'm going to call it this, and my object is going to be contact. Being able to type a lot helps. And now I can pick from my contact, and I've got my contact fields, and I want my ID field, which is this, equals. And now I can specify from my variables, record ID. So I had gotten this text field called record ID, and now I'm doing a search for all the contacts that have this record ID. Since I'm searching by record ID, I only want the first record because there should only be one. If there's more than one record that has the same 18-digit ID, something bad happened. And once upon a time, when you had to build flows uphill both ways in the snow, you had to actually choose the fields and let Salesforce do the rest. You had to do this one. And every time you brought stuff in, you'd have to add your own record variable, and you'd have to map out what fields it did. And then it became a little bit more advanced, and you could choose the fields that you wanted, but it still took care of that for you. And then if you're dealing with small scale flows, this really cool option came along, which is automatically store all fields. And the thing is, it doesn't actually store all fields. So keep in mind, it only stores the fields that you reference specifically. So if I were to go run this again and debug, this is going to ask me for a record ID. It's not going to let me go without this. So I can come here and go into this and get my record ID, which now has here, and it'll run. It gets records, but it didn't really store any fields here because I haven't used any. However, if I come in here and now on this one, I'm going to say reference the key demographic and content consent information for, I can reference this again. And I've got the contact from my get contact info. So I can say, okay, I want this person, the person who came back from my get info. I'm going to take that individual and I'm going to do and I'm going to get their name. Keep in mind, saving as I go along. Now I'm going to activate this again. Or, no, not deactivate. Activate. I want to debug. And I've got my record here again. And notice now, store the values of these fields, ID and name. So as I add stuff in the flow where I reference stuff from this contact, it's going to store those in here, and it's going to add them to the SOQL query that it runs automatically. I don't have to keep track of which fields I've added and make sure I get them and assign them to a variable or add them to a list. The flow builder is taking care of any field that I add throughout the course of my flow. It's picking it up and getting it. It's a really handy feature to not have to keep track of that. So now my intro screen has some useful information. It's a rich text component here, so I can do some formatting stuff. I can put things in, but let's see. So I want to do this. I can, add in a bullet list, and I can say this will be our address, email address, home phone, mobile phone, and email and telephone consent. So I can put this in here, but let's play around with something on one of our new ones. Sorry, where is it? So we've got sections we can put in. All right, so I can put it in this section and call it something or other, stick this here. And now I can do in my section, I can have it be a single column that's full width, or I can add a column. And I don't want them half and half per se. I want this one to be a little bit wider. Notice it's split into 12s. So I can say 8 of 12 and 4 of 12. And now I can put something else in here. So I can stick another component here on this other side. Well, maybe what I want to do here is a display image. So I'm going to have it show an image here. And I'm going to give it a image of, let's see, I want, I might have to upload it or something like that, but I could put an image here, or I could put a, anything else here. I could stick something along the lines of a, oh, that's an easier way. That's what I'm thinking of. I can do display text over here. Because it's rich text, I can put an image in this way. So I can add an image. Now I can just pick something from, let's do this one. I'll try to give some nice tranquil stuff here. There we go. So this multi-column gives me some stuff to make it a little bit more attractive. It could be a logo, it could be something like that. I could have the person, if, for example, we had the relationship where that person, and I needed their photo in there for this, I could display the photo of the contact we were updating. So, there's a lot of things that we can do here with this that lay out, and this multi-column gives us a lot more capability to display things and organize stuff in the way we would have before. So this is a really kind of cool improvement. I did not give it an API name. So there we go. All right. The question is, though, that's great, but what do I want to do with this person? I want to update the contact information. So let's get into the kind of core stuff of what we want to do here. So in the old world of things, this is our new fields beta. Again, this is beta. You're agreeing the Unified Pilot Research Agreement, blah, 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 governs the use of this beta feature. Make sure it agrees with your org before you touch this. Some places the terms are not compatible from a legal perspective, and it gets to be problematic, but in other cases, you can put it in. So if I'm doing this old world style, I'm putting an address piece here. And notice this component is now actually displaying fully. Before it did not, it just said address. Well, now that the new canvas is now displaying stuff more, I'm now getting my individual fields. All right, so let's do this. Address, okay. And it's funny because this one has the label, but notice the label is all the way down here. If I leave this blank, it's going to yell at me, but I can type address here. It doesn't do anything. So if it shows the label before the API name, it will fill it out. If it shows the label after the API name, it will not. I'm going to call it this. And now, because I want to do this, I want to be specific, and I'm going to say, you know, home address. Notice one of the nice things is I can change this to suit my terminology, though. So if I just drag a field in, I have to say whatever that field is. Mailing address might be, but what if we wanted to call it the home address? Because we're not really concerned about mailing. We want to know where they live, and we want to specify it that way. We're using the field that says mailing address, but we are specifically calling it what we want because of how we use it. One of the things that Flow Builder gives us is the ability to set things up in a way where I can label things differently than I have it back in Salesforce. So I can make it friendly for a person who's trying to run a call script so they don't have to translate that in their head. Or if I'm presenting this flow in a public interface or through a community, I can make it end user friendly. So one of the differences you'll have here is you'll notice here on the back end, while it looks like it's one big field, I can't just point at a magical address field in Salesforce. I'm going to have to fill this with each individual area. So if I want the city field, I'm going to have to map it to the mailing city field for that one. And this country options is the active countries configured in the state and country pick list. So if I want to have my country options, I can have that there if I'm using state and country pick list. If not, I want to put in country value here. And now I'm going to grab this from my record, mailing country, and same with postal code. I'm going to map this back to postal code here, and my state and province. Again, all this from the get contact info. I'm typing so I don't have to scroll through those huge lists. Oh wait, this is state and province options. So this is, again, if I'm using state and country pick lists here, instead, I don't want it here. I want this up under my value here. And my street. So this is, again, my contact and mailing street. All right, so now when I map this and give this to a contact, it's going to have that information. And again, though, let's see. So what was I trying to get here? I also wanted to get the email address. Well, my email address, I've got an email input field here, so I can drag this to the screen. And now I can say things here. So I want home email address. And I can call it home email. I can give it placeholder text. I can specify whether or not I want this disabled. And so if I disable it, this is basically makes it read only. So I can show the address and I can allow them to see the address but not change it. Well, that's not what I want to do this time. I want them to be able to update this address if it's different. I can also have it as a read only, where it will show it as a normal, but they can read only. Disabled actually shows it in kind of a grayed out fashion. So they can't use it or copy it, which is an interesting one. Read only is there. Required, I can make this a required field. And one of the things you'll notice is global constant equals false. Well, I want this to be a global constant of true. And you notice these are options you have here up under this for any Booleans. So I want this field to be required. I don't want someone to be able to skip this without having an email address there. And I'm going to map this again. I'm going to go to my contact from my get contact info, and I'm going to grab their email address. Okay. And I can do the same thing, and I can come over here and launch a new one. And I said, what did we have? Phone. So here we go. We've got their, this will be the home phone. And it's going to, again, pain in the butt. I have to actually fill out the API name here and the other. The pattern is actually a tool that you can use to specify if you only want specific types of phone values to come in. So say you want it to only be in a format of a certain kind or from certain countries, etc. Placeholder text, I can put something in here and do something like this. I do not want this to be read only. Placeholder text displays there in a kind of grayed out fashion, and when they go to enter it, whatever entry they have writes it out. This placeholder text only shows if it's blank. I can again make this required because I'm going to tell it this is a global constant of true. That is it required as a Boolean or a yes/no checkbox value? So if I say true, I'm saying this is a required field. It's a checkbox. And now my value is if I already have a contact and I already have a phone, I can check this home phone field and fill it out. And I can drag another one here. And I can call it again what I want. And we've got mobile phone. I could also call it cellular phone if I wanted. And change what it displays to the end user. I can again put in placeholder text if I want to show the format that I want it. I can set this to required because I want them to make sure they fill this out. And I can give it a value. So I can type and get in my mobile phone field here. I left off an API name somewhere on the screen. All right. So this is update. Again, the label is before this, so update contact information. It'll fill it out in name case for me because the label field was above the API name field. It fills it out automatically. All right, so now we have some stuff in here. I was able to set this, and now if I go to run this flow, I can debug. And now I've got some more information that it's getting. So one of the first things I'll see is it has updated and added a bunch more fields that's included in here. And I can see my lovely image that I put in here, and I can have my text that I'm displaying here, and it's merging the fields. So I've got it talking about Andy Young, who's my contact, and I've got it greeting me by name. And now I've got all my contact information for Andy here. And so I have that he is at 1301 Hotch Drive. Notice my required fields have the asterisks in front of them. We can see things. And now, because I'm at the end of my flow, I can finish. They'll give me the option to run again or do some other stuff. So I've collected some information from my end user. I have the chance for them to enter some of the updates and stuff like that. Let's talk about some other options that we have here on our Screenflow. So now what I want to collect is that consent information. And to do this for a demo, I have added 2 fields to my record, can consent and can call, or can email and can call. So this is just a way for me to track this, and now I want to keep track of this. Now, there's a nice thing about this is that I've got some different options for displaying how I want to do this checkbox. It could be a checkbox, and I could do a single checkbox. Keep in mind, a checkbox is a checkbox field. A checkbox group is a multi-select pick list. The difference between the radio buttons and the checkbox group is essentially that it's this is multi-select, this is single select. I also have a multi-select pick list and a pick list option. Now again, remember before Summer 21, if I picked radio buttons and I specified my options here, I was done, you know. So, you know what? I want to do something else with this. I want to ask on my previous screen, which is their preferred phone number. So I've got the phone numbers here. Let's do a preferred phone number. So I could do this a couple ways. I can make a pick list here, and I'm going to call this preferred phone. And my data type is text, and I'm doing a single option, and it's a pick list, and my choices here I'm going to add in will be I've got a choice here, and it's going to be notice I'm giving it kind of a name that's from me, but my label here, on the other hand, can be home. My data type, it's going to be text, and I can give it a value of home. So now I can work with this and specify it. So this is one of my choices here. I want to add another choice here, and I can do this here with this going in. It's a little bit odd. You might be thinking, why am I doing this for the chest? Well, I'll show you this in just a second here for a different way to do this. So I can do here, preferred phone is mobile. And my display label, what they're going to see is mobile. And my data type here is text. And it's just going to be the word mobile here that I'm going to type in. Okay, so now I can see this. I've got this here. When I save it, notice I have to save before I can run it or debug it. I've got my entry here. So now I've got my other stuff. Now I come down here and I've got a pick list. So home or mobile. Well, you know, maybe I want to display that a little bit differently. So before Summer 21, to do this field, if I wanted to start over again as radio buttons, I had to take this one off, redo everything that I just did, and put it back on. Summer 21, I now have this component type, and I can say, radio button, boom, done. Or maybe it's multi-select. Oh, now it's a checkbox group. Or it's a multi-select pick list. So I've got flexibility here now to change this and not have to redo all the work that I did to set up those choices for it. I like the radio button look. And I'm going to move it up here, up above that. Leave it. The other way that we could do this is if we had I can give it a default value I can make it required. And notice because the radio button, I've got that. What if I left it as a pick list here? When I went to go run it, I'd have an option that said none as far as selected goes. So again, that's a summer 21 improvement because none is now a thing that you can have. Before that was not a catch. You had an easier or a harder time doing that. Again, I'm going to switch this back because I like the radio buttons. I save it. I debug it. Pick here. And I jump to, and now I've got this. So I've added my phone number stuff into it to be able to select which one is my default. If, however, I already had a field called preferred phone, and maybe I do, I could have added a choice instead. Let's see, of a pick list choice set. And let's do contact. Let's see, I don't think I have one on here in this object yet. Pick list. And now, yeah, so I don't have a pick list for this. But if I already had a field called preferred phone, I could use that as to provide my choices. Since I don't have that on here, I can't use that. If I were able to use the beta feature and I had a preferred field for phone, I could drag that over here and use it and just use that field. So this is one of the nice things. I can specify here my thing here, and then I can go in and go, let's see, if I got, notice it only works for certain types of fields. It is a beta feature, so it's not quite ready for prime time. But when that comes out, that'll make a lot of this a lot easier because then I will just drag over email address and have it there and not have to do all the hoops that I just jumped through to set this up to have all these elements. So now my next goal here is I want to update contact information. And the contact information that I want to get is their consent. So I'm going to call this screen element consent capture. And now one of the things is you dealt with this consent before. Lots of places, they don't just want to have anything said. They have very specific text that will be read. And so let's say this. All right. So, all right. I'm going to call this consent instructions. And now I'm going to do this of and maybe I want to make this bigger. I want to make it bold. And then I can put in another display text, and this will be my actual script. And so this will be the email consent script. And have your permission to send email to you related to products and offerings that we think you may be interested in based on current purchases. Spell check with my friends. I really can't type today, and as my rad learners would tell you, I have trouble typing anyway, but currently that's hampered even further by a finger that's messed up. So one of the things that's option here that you can change your interface around. You notice, for example, like on a regular record, you couldn't do checkbox groups as a multi-select, but you can here. You couldn't do radio buttons instead of a pick list on your standard Salesforce record, but in a flow, I can do that. I can't do a slider to do numbers between 1 and 10, but I can do that here in a flow, for example. And instead of a checkbox, I can instead do a toggle. So and here we go. I can give it an active label, which is yes. And I can give it an inactive label, which is no. And now I've got a little toggle that says yes or no here. And now say I want this to happen every time. So, you know, something you may want to dig up for the record, but this time I wanted to do because consent goes stale. So you want to really say, hey, yes, they agree to it this time. And now I'm going to associate this. I don't want to associate it with a record. I don't want to pre-populate this because I want them to ask the question again. And now I'm going to kind of copy this text here and change it a little bit for phone because I don't like typing. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to paste. Oof. Apparently I copied way too much, so I guess I am going to type this. And, you know. All right, what are you doing? Of your consent to contact you via telephone about your specific services and products you have purchased from us. You know, something like that. And again, I'm going to bring in a toggle here, and I'm going to do this. To phone. And my active label is again yes, and my inactive label is again no. And I don't want to populate this from the existing record, so I'm not going to put a value in here. And I did not give this a name, so this would be script. All right. Now it's going to quit yelling at me. And, oh, I didn't put a label here. And this is phone. Again, I can't type. And again, I'm putting things in more friendly terms to someone who's working with this. And if I save and I debug. So save and debug become your really good friends as you work through flows. All right, so I've got my screen. It's doing all the other fun stuff it did before. And now I've got my information here, and oh, it's not going to let me go past because I did not specify preferred phone, but I said it was required. Okay, and now I've got this here, and I can read my script. And notice when I say it switches to no to yes. No to yes. All right, so I finished this. It ran my flow. So I've changed some stuff here, potentially. Let's try this again. So now I'm going to go ahead and now I'm going to try changing stuff. And let's say Andy has a new phone number, and the new phone number is +1 777 777 7777. All right, I updated this in the flow. Oh, I didn't specify. It's going to be home phone as the preference. Okay, here, and they're allowing me to email, but they don't want me to phone calls anymore about stuff. All right, so I go back and I refresh Andy's record. Wait, phone number is still the old one. So I opened it, I ran it. Who thinks they know what happened? Why did my record change? So Janae, what do you think?
I think it's because you don't have that particular response tied to the field in the database.
Yep, so I never created a new element to update my record. A lot of people go with debug mode, but debug mode is really just, it shows you what's going on in your flow, but it's not actually changing stuff. So now I need to update my contact record to feed that information back. Okay, so all I have to do is this, and now it's coming back. All right, so I've now got an update element in here. And now let's see, so I'm updating that contact info. Let's see what happens now. Is this going to work? If I run through this, is now going to update Andy's information. Okay, and what are we changing? We're changing this phone number, and it's 777-777-7777. All right. Oh, I still did select home phone again. And we're going to say yes to emails. All right. So now I just updated it. I've got an update element in there. And I'm going to reset my contact. And womp womp. Okay, so I have an update element. The problem is, all these things that I'm putting on screens, I haven't told it what to do with this information. So what I need, if I want to tell it what to do with this information, is I need to use an assignment piece here. And the assignment piece will let me specify where these things go. Now, this will be it's a multi-step thing. Now, those of you who dealt with stuff on Apex, this is familiar. If it just lives in memory, and I haven't done anything with it to give it here. So until I set the contact record stuff here, it isn't mapped to anything. So I'd have to come in here and I do this email address and boom, and then I have to map it to my element that's here on screen, where I called it, what did I call it? Where's it at? It is home email. And I'm going to tell it to use the value. Now, on this component, I have a bunch of options. So I could choose whether to disable or label or the other stuff, but I want to make sure that I'm including the value. That is what the person entered here. And if I were doing this on an address or phone field, so let's come in here. I want to do the same thing for our phone. So I want the home phone here, and I'm going to set it to, again, my screen element, and I'm going to search for it because I don't want to deal with a lot of this stuff. I'm going to wrap it here to home, and again, this one has a value to select. And then let's say, because I'm going to do one that's different, let's do the address here. Mailing address. Here's the problem. It's not smart enough to let me put in the mailing address. So what I have to actually do is select each of these individually and come in and do, all right, here, get contact, and I have to do here, mailing city equals the address box that it said customer address and city, because notice this one has the different fields and each one is a value that I can pick from. And so I'd have to go through and map each of these individually, and then I have to go through and do the consent, other stuff like that. This takes a long time, and I want to shift to gears to something else. So what I'm going to do here is shift to another flow where I've already got this mapped out. And then I'm going to show you how to pull this into a flow and how we can leverage this flow on the record. So there's all kinds of different ways we can leverage a flow on a record. So I have here, a bunch of these for contact updates of different kinds. I'm going to go with, let's see, which one do I want here? I think it's this one that I want. Here. I know this one, it's basically the same thing we've done before. The screen's a little bit different because I, was in a different mindset when I did it each time. Notice my summary doesn't have the nice little thing there, although I did the text, doesn't have the image because this is done before multi-column, but I'm mapping all these values out. So I can come in here and I can have these different values mapped out. And you can just kind of see how they map it out. It is a little bit more tedious, but it does work. Now, here's the thing. So with this from an object, how do I give someone access to this flow? Because clearly I don't want to give them admin right to then come in and run the flow manually from the back end. Like, that's not what I want to do. I want it to live on the record page where they're working so they can see it right away. So I'm going to go to the contact object, and I'm going to put this in, and I'm going to do a action as a button. So I have one that I'd created previously and had already put on the layout, but I'm doing a new action for this one. And see, the thing is, if you do an action, it still shows as a button because of lightning. But the nice thing is I can specify from this action, I can specify an action type of creating a record, send an email, log a call, blah, 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 lightning component, but I also have this flow option here. And now I can do this with the flow. Had I actually gone through and done this and activated this flow in the latest version, I could specify that flow and make it run. So I'm going to come in here. One of the things about flows is here on this side, you can actually do this view details and versions. And the nice thing about this, I can see the different versions that have been saved and activated previously, and I can come through and activate one of these. And so now when I come back here, I need to start over again because I changed something on the back end. So I need to start over to get the new list. I'm going to say flow. And I can pick my contact info and I can give it a label of I'm calling it this so I can tell which one is which because I have a couple of them in here. And now, like anything else that I've had, I have to add it to my layout before it shows. So I'm going to come to my contact layout. And I'm going to add this as an action. So I'm going to come down here in my mobile and lightning actions. And I've got my update contact with image. I'm now going to put it next to this one. So I have here now a way to run this flow. So the cool thing is I can put it in with buttons. And now this one runs the older version of the flow that has all the update logic in there built properly. This one runs the newer version that has my image and my multi-column stuff. So that's one way I could put a flow in. But Maybe I want to make it more obnoxious. I want my user to see this and do this. So the other way I can do this is I can edit my page. And I can stick a flow in here with a flow component. So I already have this in here, and I'd already set it, and notice it has a kind of that custom visibility applied to it, where I did this previously. And the only requirements I set in here was that this one could equal false. But let's start over from scratch again. So flow, here I can drag this in, I can put this up on the screen, and I don't want to run that one, I want to run my new one. And here, you know what? I'm going to move this over here instead, because I've got this one now as multi-column. I want to make this one bigger. I want to make this one able to work better. And I think I still select one column. And if I do this, it passes the record ID into it for my variable. Now, when I save this, this page has already been activated. So now, if I come back in, my flow is going to load right up here at the top of the record and prompt them to do this. Okay, so here's the other thing. Maybe I don't want it to always show there. So maybe I want it to show only if the record's been old. You know, it's been too long since someone touched it. So I can apply visibility requirements to it, something like, you know, we'll say, you know, like here, we've got something like we could do a formula field for last. Nope, not assistant. All right, behave. Last. All right, wait, what have I got? Is it activity date? Do I have it on here? All right. But, you know, I could have a formula field that says, hey, the last time this thing was modified was this, and or has it been over? Oh, that's what I'm looking for. So days since, I frequently do a formula like called days since last modified or days since last active. And when I do that, you can typically say, okay, this one is less than 90, greater than 90, et cetera. So, you know, if it's been over a year since we updated this contact, I could change it. So this flow only shows when it's been over a year since we've updated that contact. So maybe that prompts my rep to go ahead and go, oh, hey, I need to get in touch with this person and update the record because we haven't talked to them in a while. You know, this is stuff that we can do. I want to make sure we leave some time for looking at scheduled flows and record triggered. So anyone have any kind of questions on some flows and some potentials on how to use them with screen flows before we jump into one of the other types?
Mark, I wanted to check. So these are the two types, buttons and through the Lightning app builder, like the Lightning page.
Yep.
So in the, what about triggering flows through process builder?
So those are not screen flows, those are backend flows.
Okay.
And that's
so
what I'm, yep. So we're going to look at some other flow types other than that. So for buttons, they have to be a screen flow. And the same with putting it on the page, it has to be a screen flow type. With our ones that are back-end automations, like a auto-launched flow that comes from a process builder per se, or a schedule triggered or a record triggered flow, those can't go on the screen or have a button assigned to them. You have to have whatever criteria triggers them to work for that.
Oh, that's excellent for me to know, because I'm always trying to distinguish which flow is used where. So
it took me a while to kind of figure that out myself, and that's why I started with that breakdown of which ones could be more interactive versus which ones were all back end, because, you know, it's like, well, but I have this flow. I want to use this flow. How do I use this flow where I want to use it? And it's like, well, you don't. And I'm like, but I want to use it here. like, yes, but this is record triggered, so it has to live here, or you have to call it this way, or this has to happen. So, you know, it does take a little bit of getting used to, and that's where we go. So if we don't have other questions, I want to kind of jump into some of the back-end flows here and showcase some of them on how to work. And I'm going to go from some pre-built examples because of time here. But let's look at our back-end flows. So an example back-end flow that I have here.
And just a quick question, Mark, for
Sure.
the Screenflow. So I'm trying to understand. So you have the button and you give the control to the user that they can click on that button, and then you basically change the page layout, right? I mean, when they click on that button, what happens? Like extra information populates on that page, or it updates?
So in this case, I have it just showing on the page. So in this case, this one just shows on the page. In the button, it doesn't change the page layout. In the button version, for example, it pops up when they click the button. So then it comes up in a modal dialog box when they click a button. And it runs the appropriate flow for what you told it to. So for example, this one here runs the older version of the flow that I showed you. It has the welcome mark to the update contact wizard, doesn't have the icon, walks through it, and it shows up in a modal when we do this. And you can have multiple buttons that call different flows, and each one shows its own flow in its own way. And then you can also put it on the page layout. They're two completely separate entities. So I can have it on the page layout and have it show, and then if they hit the button, it runs in a completely different way. And it becomes what's called a different interview. So each time a flow gets run, whether it's on the page or whether it's in the called by a button or by some other mechanism, it's known as a flow interview. That's the process that it runs in. And so these are disconnected interviews. If I have it on the layout and I also call it from a button, I wouldn't want them to necessarily do that. So it's all trade-offs there, but yeah, they're not connected. If I change this, it does not change the page layout at all. So it's either I'm changing the page layout because I'm choosing to show it on the layout, or I'm adding it as a button because I'm choosing to add it as a button. I can do both, but they're not connected. I can't make the button change the page layout.
Right. So, okay, if you click on next here, what happens?
It runs through the flow in the modal.
Okay.
And, you know, if I were to, let's see, so I think I set it to save the phone here. That was one of the fields I set it, mapped it to. So it should come in. I want to do this. And now it's gone back to my record. And because Lightning is slow about updating, and I can't remember which fields I mapped on the active version. Yeah, so I didn't map them on this one, but let me run this one because this one has the complete mappings here. So if I come through and I say he is not in Lawrence, Kansas, he is in, you know, let's see.
Topeka, Kansas.
Topeka, there we go. That's one. He's in Topeka, Kansas instead. You know, and I'm not going to check this box here. You know, it updated my record immediately, and so I can call him, but I can't email, and he's in Topeka. So when it runs in the flow, if I've set it to change the record and I've mapped my fields out, it will update the record that I'm on from here.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Mark, there's
So,
one more question from Diana. Diana, you want to ask? She's asking, how does field level security affect the running user?
So that is a fantastic question. So depending on how you run a flow, as a Screenflow, you have the ability to make it respect permissions or not respect security permissions. So you have the ability to make it run as a user. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose Save As here because this is where I can switch that. I have an option here to select how to run this flow. And I can say run it as user or system context depending on how it was launched. I can run it as system context with sharing. And what that means is it's a little bit out of a nomenclature because like with sharing, it means it shares the record to them. No, no, no. With sharing means it follows the sharing rules. So if a user can't see that record, they can't update the flow. Or we can run with this system context without sharing. That means that lets them see data that they wouldn't normally be able to see. And this can actually be really useful stuff for working through things. So, you know, one of the things you can have here is you can actually have a flow that will let a user do things in a specific guided process where they have to answer certain questions about what they're doing before they can update it. So say, for example, you had a scenario where a salesperson wants to give a higher discount than is normally allowed. You could actually make a flow that allows them to do that, but it's going to capture them. It's going to ask them. It's like, okay, you're doing this, you're selecting this. It's a competitive offer. It's a blah, blah, blah. You're matching it. The discount is this and something like that. And it will allow them to put a discount in that they wouldn't normally be able to change in that field, right? Or be able to update something they would not normally be able to update because you're giving them a specific criteria and you're running it in system context. So you're giving access to fields that they wouldn't normally have access to. You can give access to records that someone normally wouldn't have access to. And the nice thing is because it's inside of that flow, you control what they have access to, right? So I can say, okay, I'm giving you access as the system administrator, but I'm giving you access for this record and these 3 fields to change them that you as a user would not normally be able to do. And this gives you a lot of power and flexibility to do things that you would not normally be able to do with your regular page layout, because you can now run it as system context and you can let them do certain things they would not be able to do otherwise. Say you needed to have someone who had a specific permission set you need to grant because you need to give them temporary access to do certain things. There's actually the ability in a flow to give a permission set that they wouldn't have normally, upgrade their access, and then downgrade it at the end of the flow or when they log out. So say someone needs to go in and they, you know, one of the scenarios, okay, you know, building locations, right? You have a database of building locations and they are all records in Salesforce and you want to control who updates them and when. You want to log that. You can actually set up a flow that says, okay, I'm going to do this, and when you run this, you're going to get permission to update these records. And once you're done updating the records or you log out, your ability to update them goes, but you have had to give me a reason when, why, where, what you were changing, et cetera, before you get that permission set. So you can log it. So this ability to run as a system user, run as other, it has a lot of flexibility. And, you know, for example, one of the things I've done is a site guest user. Guest users can't write to a Salesforce. But I wanted a simple form where someone could make a report, a problem on a website for a Salesforce community or digital experience, they call them now. Well, I made a flow that runs as a system user. It runs as with sharing, so they can't see any records other than what they create. But the idea is that they can fill out and say, okay, this site is wrong. Here's where they came into this error. This is the error message they got, blah, 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 blah. Here's their email, and hit submit. And it would create a case for them. They never had to log in. They had no user ID, but they can go ahead and create a case from this that would allow them to report a problem on a website. That was doable by having this with system context that they didn't have before. So this, it really is, it opens up a lot of things that you can do that you probably would not be able to do normally. But if you choose as the user, they only can access the fields they would normally. They can only see the fields they would normally. And that's both good and bad because here's the thing, if you have a field that they don't have access to edit and it's required and they have to update it and they can't see it on the flow, and they can't do anything with it, it will give them an error and they can't continue. So you do have to watch out for these, but again, you have some flexibility here as to what you do. And remember the interview that we talked about? Well, we can have an interview label that says basically, what flow it was, when they're running it, but you can also tailor it and go who the user is that was running it, other stuff like that you can reference, date, time, other things about them, which profile they had, etc., that comes into it. So if you're actually backtracking a problem, you can do that here. And this is when you initially create a flow or do a save as action, you have these options again to be able to adjust stuff.
There's one more question. It's from Karan. He says, what's the default option run if we don't select anything?
So the default is going to be the user or the system context, depending on how it was called. So for example, if it's an auto-launched flow and it's called by a process builder runs in system administrator. So that runs in a system context. On the other hand, if it's a screen flow and it's on a page, it's run in user context. So it's going to depend on how it was called originally for that flow. Most cases it runs as a user if it's a screen flow and it's on a page, or a button unless you specify otherwise. If it's a auto-launched flow and it's called by process builder, it's run as system context because that's how process builder runs. If you call it from Apex class, then it's going to run in the setup of the Apex code, which could be either system context with sharing or system context without sharing. Because right now there's no user mode for Apex. Forward-looking statement that is coming in the future, but right now there is no user mode for Apex. It's either system with or system without. And then, you have like the platform events, which typically run as a system user because that's how they get created by system. Your record triggered flows run as, depends on how you trigger them. But yes, it depends on how it's called as to what the default mechanism is. On screen flows, your default is going to be your user-based. On others, it's primarily going to be system-based or depending on where it's come from. If you call a auto-launch flow from a screen flow that's running as a user, your auto-launch flow runs as the user. So your default is going to be whatever context calls it. All right. Anything else before we get into our other types of flows? Because next up, I want to show a use case for a scheduled triggered flow.
Yeah, no other question, Mark, and also time check. It's 7 minutes left. Right?
Yep. So let's take a look at scheduled delinquent account owner. So this is a flow that I created. It's a scheduled flow. And scheduled flows look a little bit different. Notice I've got some start criteria here. So I can specify here what happens and I've got a start date, time, and the frequency. I can do this once, daily, or weekly. I don't have monthly, I don't have yearly. There are tools that will allow you to schedule it in a more advanced fashion to run at different times with a regular auto launch flow, but your scheduled triggered flow covers a lot of these. And then right now I've got a thing on accounts where I want to make sure its days since last activity is greater than 60 and their annual revenue is over $1 million, because I want to limit who I'm sending this to, but I want to make sure this is the last one. One of the things you'll see different from my other flow is I've got a decision element here. Decision element lets me do various paths. So I've set up here if a day since last activity is greater than or equal to 90 or less than 120 for the different paths. I have a path here where it's 90 to 120 days or over 120 days or a default outcome, which means it's less than 90 and more than 60, because again, my scheduled flow is only getting those. So what's happening here is it comes in and I've got my different paths here. So if this is greater than 120 or between 90 and 120, or my default, which is greater than 60 and less than 90 as it is. And I can put different actions in here to have stuff happen. So say my default is it's greater than 60 and below 90. I might want to have an action here. And my action will be tasks. And so I can create a new task for my record owner here. And I could put in and I could say this, and I've got my record ID, and I can do this from here. Again, I'm coming from my other. So this is a little bit different because now I have a global variable, which is record and account. And I can do this. The related record ID is the ID for this. And it's account ID. And I can say, what do I want to put in for description? So account, and I can give a due date. And my due date is here. Now notice I've got to either put in a day, month, year, but if I want to make it something that's longer than that, I'd actually use another type of resource called a formula.
Cool, Sarah. We'll meet there soon, okay?
And so let's do this today plus 7. So my due date is within a week. And it's not going to like that. Today plus 7. And I come in here and it is a date because it's expecting a date. And I can give this, and I can go in and go, okay. So I have from my, let's see where it is. If I search, is it going to give me? No, it's not. So I have to come in here and do this from my flow. And it's the current date. And now I'm going to add 7 to it. So my due date is in a week. And I can come in here and I can say, okay, this is the name ID or the who ID, and I'm going to put it to my account owner. So I'm going to do my account record, and I'm going to do the owner ID, and now I'm going to do this with ID. And I want, no, not record owner, account ID, I want user ID. There we go. And I can put in a subject. Okay. So now I've got this task that'll run every night, the schedule flow that would run every night. And right now I've got it. So if it's, between 60 to 90 days, I put a task in to say, hey, get in touch with them. And, if it's now between 90 and 120 days and they don't have it, I'm sending them an email to say, hey, get in touch with these people. Like, this is an important count you're ignoring right now. And if it's over 120 days, I can have a different action. I could maybe set the email to go to them and their boss. And go, hey, you ignore the previous emails, and this account is still behind the scenes. So, we can get back into it from that. Another quick flow that I want to show is kind of an example here of how things could be done is the, let's see, this is the record triggered flow that I made. This is one that often comes up and is a before save flow. So have you ever had this where you create an opportunity in the system and your users are like, we want it to be the close date to be automatically filled out because it's a mandatory field, and you want it to be filled out and you want the close date to be 90 days from today or the date the opportunity is created. Well, before this, you had to use a trigger because that opportunity close date field will not allow default values because it's a system field. It would not allow you, you can't do it with a formula. A lot of people could do it with a process builder, but then it saves. No, you can't do it with a process builder because you have to save it. So it would run into loops and all sorts of other stuff. So here I've created a record triggered flow that's straightforward. Notice I don't need an update record element here. because it is a before save. So what's happening is my criteria here, a record is created before the record is saved. It is updating, close date is null as true, so they didn't put in a close date. And then what's happening here, I'm updating it, and I put this in, and I've got a record close date. So in this case, I set it for a fixed number. Every opportunity needs to close before January 1st, the year 2100. Not so great, but I could also put it in here as a formula field. And so now I can create a formula here as a resource, same thing that we did before. So call this close date formula. I often put in things like formula close date for something like this, so it's easy to find my things later on. Okay, this is a formula, this is a field, this is whatever. Those can come in handy. Again, I'm going to do the date. I'm going to do grab today's current date from the flow that it's running, and now I'm going to add 90 days to it. And now, when I activate this, I have a record triggered flow that runs before the record saves, and every time someone creates an opportunity and it doesn't have close date, before it saves, it's going to set that close date to today plus 90 days. And so now if they leave that date field blank, it's not going to give them an error message. It's going to go ahead and create the opportunity and pre-populate it with a predefined date. And now they have to live with it. But, you know, it's one of those things that makes a user life much easier. It's a really simple, straightforward, like, it's such a quick win. Every place that I've ever worked with opportunities, everyone hates the close date field because they don't necessarily have a defined close date. And so they're always like, well, we just want it to be today plus 120 days or 6 months from now or by the end of this year. Magic. You are a wizard if you can pull this off for people. So Flow Builder, like I know I kind of get excited when I'm talking about this, but there's some really cool things that you can do super quickly with Flow that can be massive quick wins for an organization. And, you know, we don't really have time to demo, but now there's new stuff in there for doing the is changed and prior value and other stuff like that that you can do to have these flows change and go, okay, so, you know, we had an opportunity and it went from this stage to this stage. So I'm going to update this, 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 and this, and put a task in there for someone else to follow up because this is getting close and it's a big deal.
This is all awesome, Mark. So we need to have a sequel, maybe, right? Sequel. Because we haven't covered the is changed and is prior.
It would not be the first time. Vancouver admin group, I've done 3 flow sessions with them. Yeah.
I mean, this will be the best thing. I mean, there's so much appreciation for your presentation in the chat. So,
you know, it's one of those, and we haven't even gotten into the stuff you can do with actions and custom lightning components, which really you want to take your flow game to the next level. Those actions that you have in there that are predefined, they're really basic. There's some really cool stuff out there, and flow components that are out there. Like the stuff that's there is basic, but you've got flow components where you can put in a whole related list. And you can build your own unique custom related list component on the page. There's fantastic stuff out there. So I would love to come back and show you more if you'd like to have me back in the future.
That will be just awesome. Everybody wants encore. It's awesome.
All right. So we are short
Thanks.
on
It was
time,
so helpful, so informative.
Jump to your TDX quiz now.
Thank you, Mark. You're welcome to participate as well.